I grew up in a house that had a Bible on the table, but dust on the dreams. You know the kind, scriptures framed on the wall, but people walking around like life had already beaten them. We prayed, yes. We hoped, sometimes. But somewhere along the way, we stopped believing. And I mean really believing. See, what no one told me, what no preacher dared to preach out loud, is that there's a verse in the Bible that doesn't just comfort you, it dares you. It calls you out. It exposes the truth you've been hiding from. Not just about God, but about you. It's not John 3:16. It's not Jeremiah 29:11. It's not even Proverbs 3:5. It's hidden in plain sight, and the scary part? Most people don't want to read it because it makes them uncomfortable, because it holds them accountable, because it doesn't just tell you to dream, it tells you why your dreams keep dying. The verse is this: you have not because you ask not. James 4:2. Let that sink in. You have not because you ask not. At first, I dismissed it. It sounded too simple, like one of those name it and claim it mantras. But the more I sat with it, the more I realized this isn't about God withholding, it's about us refusing. I looked around at my life and it hit me like a punch to the chest. I was living a life I settled for, not a life I asked for. I had stopped asking. Not just in prayer, but in courage. I stopped asking for more because I didn't believe I deserved it. I stopped asking for healing because I got used to the pain. I stopped asking for purpose because being numb felt easier than being disappointed again. And here's the part that hurts. So many people are walking around angry at God for not delivering dreams they never had the faith to request out loud. Let me tell you something that happened. I was 24, broke, and completely disconnected from who I wanted to be. I was working a job that drained me, in a city that suffocated me, around people who only reminded me of how far I hadn't come. I used to sit in my car before work, engine off, hands shaking, just trying to talk myself into pretending I was okay. One night, I broke. Not in a poetic way. In a desperate way. I cried like a child in the driver's seat of a 1998 Toyota. And I whispered something I hadn't said in years. I said, God, I don't know who I am anymore. But if you're real, if you still see me, I'm asking. I want a new life. I want peace. I want to feel like I matter. I don't care how, I don't care when, but I'm asking. That night didn't magically change my life, but it did change something deeper. I gave myself permission to ask again. And that simple, forgotten Bible verse, "You have not because you ask not," became a haunting truth I couldn't ignore. What if your dreams aren't dead? What if they're just waiting for you to ask? This is where the journey begins, not with hustle, not with grind, not with a vision board, but with a question you haven't dared to ask. And the real twist? Most people don't ask because they've been taught to expect pain instead of provision. In part 2, we'll talk about the hidden shame behind that silence and the brutal truth about what happens when you live your whole life trying not to be a burden. There's a kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful. It feels like you're slowly disappearing. I learned that silence when I was young, not because anyone told me to be quiet, but because I was afraid that speaking up would lead to rejection. Or worse, indifference. See, a lot of us don't stop asking because we stopped believing in dreams. We stop asking because we started believing we're not worth the answer. Maybe you were the kid who got ignored unless you achieved something. Maybe you were the teenager who got laughed at for dreaming out loud. Maybe you were the adult who finally tried and failed and convinced yourself it's safer to stop trying. And somewhere along the way, a quiet vow formed in your soul. Don't ask for too much. Don't expect too much. Just survive. But here's the brutal truth. Survival isn't enough. You were made to build, to create, to live. But shame, especially silent shame, teaches you to shrink. And shame doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it sounds like, "Who do you think you are? Why would God choose you?" Other people are more deserving. So we sit back. We nod politely at other people's victories. We clap when someone else gets the job, the marriage, the healing, the breakthrough. We act happy, but deep down we're dying because we stopped believing God even sees us. And that's the part nobody likes to admit. That some of us don't feel ignored by people. We feel ignored by heaven. Let me tell you a story. I had a close friend. Let's call her Maya. She was the strongest person I knew. Always smiling, always encouraging everyone else. She dreamed of starting a nonprofit for kids. She had the passion, the skills, the fire. But every time she talked about it, she'd end the sentence with, "But I don't think I'm meant for something that big." One day, I asked her why. And she said something I'll never forget. Because when I was 9, I told my dad I wanted to change the world. And he laughed. And that silence, it stayed. That silence stayed. And it's staying with a lot of people reading this right now. You're not lazy. You're not broken. You're not talentless. You're just carrying shame that never belonged to you in the first place. And here's what's controversial. Church culture sometimes reinforces that silence. We preach humility so hard that people confuse it with invisibility. We say God's will so much that people forget God also gave us a will and asked us to use it. James 4:2 doesn't say, "You have not because God doesn't want you to have." It says, "You have not because you ask not." That means the door might be locked, but the key is in your hand. Not because you're powerful, but because God already gave permission. You just need the courage to use it. In part 3, we're going to talk about what happens when you finally ask, and things don't change immediately. The dark waiting room where most people give up, and the quiet test God never announces but always allows. No one tells you how long the hallway between asking and receiving can feel. You gather the courage to finally ask, with your whole chest, your whole heart, and you expect the clouds to part. You expect lightning or a miracle. You expect something. But what you get is silence. Nothing changes. Not the job, not the pain, not the loneliness. And you start to wonder, did I ask wrong? Did I imagine the verse? Is God even listening? That's when most people walk away. Not because they don't believe in God, but because they're tired of the echo in the waiting room. Let me tell you something honest. The time after you ask is the most dangerous time in your entire spiritual life. Because that's where doubt creeps in like a whisper, disguised as reason. And here's the part no one likes to say. God will test your faith after you speak, not before. He doesn't test your desire. He tests your patience. Let me share a story. A guy I know, we'll call him Tolu, was battling addiction in secret. He had tried therapy, prayer, accountability groups. Nothing seemed to stick. One night, he fell on his knees and prayed one of those raw, bleeding throat kind of prayers. God, please, take this from me. I can't live like this anymore. And for the next few weeks, nothing changed. In fact, things got worse. He relapsed harder than ever. He told me, "It was like God didn't just ignore me. It felt like he mocked me." But something strange happened on the 41st day. Tolu was walking home from work and passed by a small group having a Bible study outside a cafe. He never would have stopped. But one guy looked at him and said, "Hey, you look like you've got a story. Want to sit with us?" That night, Tolu said it was like God whispered, "I wasn't ignoring you. I was building you." See, we want microwave miracles, but God is often planting seeds, and seeds don't scream when they grow. There's a verse in Habakkuk 2:3 that most people skip over. "Though the vision tarry, wait for it, it will surely come, it will not delay." But to us, it feels like a delay. Because we measure dreams with clocks. God measures them with character. You want the business, but can you handle the responsibility? You want the relationship, but can you love without conditions? You want the platform, but will you serve without applause? These are the silent tests, the waiting room questions, the uncomfortable shaping that happens between the prayer and the promise. Here's the part that hurts and heals. God's silence isn't always rejection. Sometimes it's preparation, but most people never wait long enough to find out. They stop believing. They pick safer dreams. They call it wisdom when it's really just fear dressed up in spiritual clothing. James 4:2 says, "You have not because you ask not." But the verses that follow warn us, "You ask and do not receive because you ask amiss that you may spend it on your pleasures." That means the heart behind the ask matters. And sometimes the wait is the fire that purifies that heart. In part 4, we'll talk about how to know if your dream is real, or if it's just a fantasy you're using to escape a life you refuse to change. Because not every dream is sacred. Some are distractions. This is the part no one likes to hear. Because while some of us never ask, some of us ask for the wrong thing. Not evil things, just empty ones. You know what I'm talking about. The dreams that look shiny on the outside, but rot your soul from the inside. The ones built from comparison, not conviction. The ones we chase because we think they'll finally shut up that voice in our head that says we're not enough. It's why someone prays for 1,000,000 followers when they haven't built a message. Why someone prays for a husband or wife, not out of love, but because they're scared of dying alone. Why someone begs for success, not to serve, but to silence the people who once laughed at them. Let me tell you something that cracked me open. God won't bless a dream that will break you. And sometimes, what you think is a no from God is actually a rescue. Here's a story I've never told publicly. I once got the offer of a lifetime, a position at a company that would have doubled my income, put me on the map, and given me everything I thought I wanted. I prayed, fasted, asked God to open the door, and when I got the call, I was ready to say yes before the recruiter even finished the sentence. But I couldn't sleep that night. My chest was tight, my thoughts were racing. I couldn't explain it, but something felt wrong. Still, I tried to justify it. This is what I asked for. This is what I prayed for. But deep down, I knew. Just because I asked for it doesn't mean I was ready for it. I turned it down. And 2 months later, I found out that company collapsed in scandal. People lost their jobs, their reputations, their peace. And I realized, God didn't deny my dream, He protected my purpose. See, James 4:2 doesn't just say ask, it's followed by a warning. You ask and do not receive because you ask amiss. That means not every dream is divine. Some are just coping mechanisms wrapped in ambition. So here's the real question. Is your dream rooted in your calling, or is it a distraction from your healing? Let that sit for a second. Because the enemy of your soul isn't always trying to make you sin. Sometimes he just wants to make you busy. Busy chasing applause, busy proving your worth, busy building something impressive. That has nothing to do with who you really are. You might be climbing a ladder that's leaning against the wrong wall. And here's the controversial part. And I say this with love. Not every unanswered prayer is a loss. Some are a mercy. God loves you too much to answer a selfish prayer with a yes. And if you're brave enough to surrender the dream He didn't give you, you might finally make space for the one He did. In part 5, we're going to talk about the real reason most people never see their dream come true. Even after they ask, even after they wait, even after they clean up their motives. It's the most uncomfortable truth of all. and the one people are most afraid to admit. Let me say this clearly, and I say it with love. Your dream won't come true if you're not willing to become the kind of person who can carry it. And that's the part we don't want to face. We think dreaming is about faith. But faith without transformation is delusion. You can pray, you can fast, you can scream James 4:2 until your throat is raw. You have not because you ask not. But the real question is, are you willing to change for what you're asking for? Because God isn't a genie. He's a gardener. And sometimes he doesn't send the fruit until you're willing to kill the weeds. The weeds of laziness, the weeds of pride, the weeds of insecurity, excuses, entitlement, all the invisible rot we secretly think God should ignore because we asked nicely. Let me give you a brutal truth. Most people don't want their dreams to come true. They want the feeling of dreaming. They want the fantasy. They want to talk about it, post about it, daydream about it, cry about it. But build it? That would mean sacrifice. And people don't talk about how violent it feels to outgrow your old self. Let me tell you what no sermon ever warned me about. The moment you truly decide to step into your dream, the real one, the one God whispered into you before anyone had an opinion, your life will fall apart. Not because you're cursed, but because everything fake must die first. I lost friends. I outgrew habits. I walked away from circles where I used to fit because I finally understood. I was asking God to promote a version of me that hadn't done the work. And God, in His mercy, said no. Because if He had said yes, if He had given me the dream I wanted before I became the person I needed to be, it would have crushed me. And here's the controversial truth I promised. Some of you are still waiting on God, but God is waiting on you. He already opened the door. He already gave you the green light. He already whispered, go. But you're still sitting in the hallway waiting for another sign, another confirmation, another perfect moment that doesn't exist. And the reason your dream hasn't come true is not because you didn't ask. Not because God doesn't love you. Not even because you're not worthy. It's because you haven't moved. You're waiting for a miracle, and God's waiting for motion. You have not because you ask not. But after you ask, you've got to act. Faith is not passive. Faith builds. Faith risks. Faith fails forward. Faith throws away the backup plan and bets everything on what God said, even when the ground is shaking. And now, I'm going to ask you something. Are you brave enough to tell the truth? Not just what you're asking God for, but what you know you've been avoiding. Drop it in the comments. I'll be reading each one. Not just to respond, but to connect. Because this world is full of people pretending they're okay. But maybe, just maybe, if you speak your dream out loud again, you'll realize God never forgot it. He was just waiting for you to remember who you really are. Let's go deeper. Leave a comment below. What's the dream you've been afraid to ask for? And what do you know needs to change for it to become real? I'll be replying personally. Let's talk. Let's heal. Let's grow. Your dream is waiting. But it's not waiting on God anymore. It's waiting on you.